morning, everyone. We're going to try to get started in a new format here this morning. As you may know, this is going to be a new thing that is going to definitely take some patience and cooperation between students and instructors. We're kind of in an unprecedented time here, so I think we're fortunate to have technology and various resources to be able to accomplish our goals in a manageable way. Obviously, it's not ideal, but at the same time, I think we're going to be able to get quite a lot covered. Maybe to some of your excitement or not, my examples and stories will probably be curtailed because of this new format. So either congratulations or I'm sorry is in order, depending on where you fall and which camp you fall. I am going to be available, at all times to answer your questions going forward in regards to the content or the format. And you believe me, the school, myself, everyone at Lincoln Land is here to help and here to make sure that you are able to navigate this new format effectively. So that being said, we'll go ahead and get started in Chapter 8. This is the third chapter of the 3 chapters in this lecture series. The plan is to have some type of exam available online before the end of this week. I will make more announcements about what that's going to look like and how we're going to do that later on, hopefully by tomorrow or Wednesday. So, anything you have as a question, please don't hesitate to send me an email. Alright, so we've covered in Chapter 7 photosynthesis. Alright, photosynthesis, we said, was how plants take the energy from the sun and turn it into a stored form of energy, glucose. Cell respiration is the other side of that equation. Alright, cell respiration is how that glucose is broken down and used for energy in all of the autotrophs. So cell respiration is a process that breaks down nutrient molecules for the production of ATP. This ATP is used to generate all of the work that's done in both plants and the rest of the heterotrophs across the planet. This process, the breakdown of glucose through cell respiration, consumes oxygen, right? Because we breathe in oxygen, okay, and produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct. So we breathe in oxygen, we're breathing out CO2. This is an aerobic process. When you think of aerobics, what's the connotation? It may be a little bit dated, but we think of 1980s and sweatbands and Richard Simmons. But the idea is that you're breathing in oxygen. That's aerobics. Okay? Aerobic processes consume oxygen. The breakdown of glucose to CO2 and water extracts energy from the glucose, and it's released in a stepwise fashion. So do you remember the equation that we put on the board? It's a very significant equation to understand. It's very important to understand and to be able to recognize, because there's so much harmony in this system. On one side of the equation, we have glucose being produced and oxygen being produced as a byproduct during photosynthesis. And then the other side of the equation, we have that glucose being broken down, that oxygen being consumed, and CO2 being produced, and the energy being transferred. And that energy then allows for the organism to do what cellular work needs to be done, right? We said there's chemical work, there's mechanical work, there's transport work, and all of that ATP is used to accomplish that. So the electrons are removed from the substrates and they are received by the oxygen, which then combines with the hydrogen to become water. Glucose is oxidized, and the oxygen is now reduced. All right, so kind of that's on the micro scale. On a macro scale, what does this look like? Here we have a little, it's an ocelot or a little jungle cat eating a iguana, and it is breathing in oxygen from the air, and it's eating its prey. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from a plant, but an animal that eats plants is also passing on that glucose. And so the food is first, masticated. It's chewed up, and then it passes into the stomach, and it's chemically broken down through digestion. All right, that chemical digestion then makes those molecules smaller, whether it breaks down the proteins into di and tripeptides, or it breaks the starches down. What happens is it makes those molecules more simple, and they're absorbed into the bloodstream. And the bloodstream then takes those nutrients, whether it's a carbohydrate, whether it is a protein, it takes it into the vascular system, and those are absorbed into the cells, okay, through endocytosis. And that chemistry allows for those nutrients to make their way to the cell. All right, so this process starts with the food going into the animal's mouth, and ultimately it makes its way into the cell, and then smaller parts are making it into the mitochondria. The mitochondria is what's breaking down and then producing a large amount of the ATP that's used for work. So the mitochondria is an organelle that drives this process, okay, the powerhouse of the cell. So NAD plus and FAD are coenzymes. Okay, they are coenzymes of the oxidation reduction reaction. Okay, it can oxidize a metabolite because it accepts electrons. See, it has a positive charge, so it can accept a negative charge, and reduce a metabolite by giving up electrons. Each NAD plus molecule is used over and over again. Right? They're like batteries. One way to think of them being recharged is used and recharged and used. The FAD is also this coenzyme of the oxidation reduction. Sometimes it's used instead of NAD plus and accepts 2 electrons and 2 hydrogen ions to become FADH2. So the phases of cellular respiration, the cellular respiration includes the 4 phases. All right, these are all important. All right, I want you to know these. Glycolysis, preparatory reaction, citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. You should know these. Glycolysis is the breakdown of that glucose molecule into 2 molecules of pyruvate. This occurs, and this is kind of an important part of this, occurs in the cytoplasm. Right? This happens before it even goes into mitochondria. And some ATP is formed. So some energy is formed in that initial breakdown of the glucose. It does not require oxygen. All right? No oxygen is needed for this first ATP to be generated. Second, we have the preparatory reaction. Both pyruvates are oxidized and enter the mitochondria. Right now, it's working its way in the mitochondria, and that pyruvate is what is the result of the breakdown of that glucose molecule is in glycolysis. The electron energy is stored in the NADH coenzyme. 2 carbons are released as CO2. All right, that's the CO2 we're breathing out. 1 from each of those pyruvates. Next, the citric acid cycle. This occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. So inside of the mitochondria is this area called the matrix, and it produces NADH and FADH2. Through a series of reactions, it releases 4 carbons as CO2. Okay, so again, we have CO2 being released. This is the CO2 that when we're breathing, it's coming from this process. This is being expelled. It turns twice per glucose molecule, so once for each of those pyruvates that come in. It produces 2 immediate ATP molecules per glucose molecule. All right. Finally, we get to the electron transport chain. This is where the large amount of energy extraction happens. The NADH and the FADH2 are responsible for carrying that energy into the electron transport chain. But electrons pass from high to low energy states, and they now are used to produce 32 to 34 molecules of ATP when a complete electron transport chain of a original glucose molecule is run through. I would very much appreciate you to understand and know how to diagram this breakdown of glucose, okay? This picture, be able to draw it, be able to explain it, okay? It's not overly complicated, but it shows the glucose going in. It shows the 4 different steps of glycolysis, preparatory reaction, citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. And it also shows the harvest of those ATP molecules. All right. So glycolysis. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm. So again, it's outside the mitochondria. It takes energy to start this thing off. Okay, it's like a match you have to light to get the fire going, get the boiler going. So when we're breaking down glucose, you have to have a little bit of energy to start the process. So 2 ATP are used to activate the glucose. Okay, this splits the glucose into these what we call pyruvate or G3P molecules. The energy harvesting step is the oxidation of the G3P molecule. This occurs by removing the electrons and the hydrogen ions. Alright, so 2 electrons and 1 hydrogen ion are accepted by the NAD+, resulting in 2 NADHs. 4 ATP are produced by this substrate level phosphorylation. And there's a net gain because say there were 4 total produced and we used 2 to start it. There is a net gain of 2 ATP per glucose molecule. Both of the G3Ps are now what we call pyruvates. Alright, this is more of a mathematical input and output of glycolysis with your glucose coming in and your pyruvates coming out, and you end up with 2 ATPs. So even before the molecules have entered the mitochondria, there are some ATPs that are being gained. Right? So there's some available energy. Alright, so this is that substrate level ATP synthesis. Alright, where you've got your pyruvates, okay, and this enzyme that's breaking them down, okay, resulting in ADP being turned into ATP. Remember we said there's adenosine diphosphate, and you add that phosphate group, so now it's adenosine triphosphate. That additional phosphate is what holds that energy in there. It's like the energy currency is now charged. Again, that's another more linear explanation of these steps. As far as the animations go, I will link to Blackboard all of these because they won't work while we're doing the voice recordings like this. I will put a link on Blackboard to each of these animations that I want you to look up on YouTube. Pyruvate is a pivotal metabolite in the cellular respiration process. All right. If oxygen is not available, all right,